Hi, this is Tim Von Rieden with cgcookie.com, and in this video tutorial I'm going to take you through how I would go about drawing hair. In this, I will go through drawing 3 different hairstyles, lengths, and colors using the color building technique. So I'll start from a sketch and then build a render from that. Okay, let's get started. So here in Photoshop, I created this head template that I'll be using to lay my hair on top. I've made it a very blank, almost mannequin kind of a head, so it's gender neutral, and I'll be laying the hairs on top of this. So each of these heads are going to have a different length and color and kind of style to them. But for this very first one, I'm going to go ahead and kind of lay out the hairline. And I'm doing this because I think it's important to kind of, while you're drawing hair, to keep in the back of your mind of where the hairline is. And this changes per person, but generally it has something of this kind of a shape. And the reason that this is important to know is because when we're drawing your hair, you have to kind of keep in the back of your mind that the hair is kind of sprouting out of the head at certain points, and that the head is round. It is not a flat shape. So when you're drawing them, the hairlines will actually be curved. So for example, like a hairline that was coming off of this section would look more curved. Even if it's shorter hair, it'll still have some of a curve to it, where it wouldn't be completely straight flat. And since the hair does have a little curve to it, the hair will reflect light differently in different areas. So if the light source was coming from an overhead view, then where it curves, so like in this section, the curve of the hair, the shine will be most prevalent there than near the tips of the hair or near the back. So that's just something to kind of keep in the back of your mind while you're drawing hair, is to always remember where your light source is coming from. And wherever that light source is coming from, know that that's going to directly affect the hair colors that you choose, and then how you're laying the hair colors on top of it. Okay, so if that one's going to be kind of our example one, I'm going to go ahead and start off with each of the other heads. And while I do that, I'm going to go ahead and change our background layer to a neutral gray, so like around a -50. And I'm doing that because it'll be easier to see the colors than if I was going on a white background, especially since the third head that I'll be doing is kind of a platinum blonde, and to do that against a white background is kind of tough, so it'll be easier to see this against a gray background. So the technique that I'm going to be using is I'm going to be sketching out an outline of the hair, and then I'm going to be filling it out with the color, and then do some multiply, cleanup work, and then do some details, and then the overlay, which will add the sheen, and then finally the last details. So to start us off, I'm going to go ahead and on each of these heads, I'm going to be creating the same layers. So for this head, I'm going to name it head 2. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new layer. And I'm going to grab just a darker brown color. So for this hairstyle, I'm not really giving too much attention to detail while I'm sketching this out, because after this is all over, I'm going to be hiding this layer out completely. So this is more of a reference for when I'm laying down the color. And for this hair, it's going to be a darker shade of color, so like a brown, very medium toned, and it's kind of a simple, short, and a good introduction to how I draw hair. So the hairstyle that I'm going with right now is kind of like a messy bob, but I'm sure my friends would call it the Bieber hair. And I get a lot of crap because this is definitely a hair I go to. It's really easy to draw, and it's kind of fun to do all the individual strands of hair and not really care too much about how clean it looks, because it's supposed to kind of be of a messy vibe. Then you'll also notice how the actual scalp of the head, how I'm drawing off of the head. Because hair doesn't lay directly flat on the head. Because if it did, it would be much tighter to the actual head when I'm drawing it. But then when it's wet or in that kind of a state, it would be more of a flat looking, closer to the scalp. But for this, we're going to keep it kind of off of it and kind of play it as if it was normal hair. And then another thing to do, or that I like to do, is I like to add little extra strands in the kind of empty space of the head. And I'm doing that because when I'm actually filling in the color with the detail, it's easier to do that when you have some lines to work off of. Because even hair that lays perfectly flat against a head, so even if it's not curly or wavy hair, it still has some breakage of strands, and it's easier to detail then with that in mind. Okay, I'm going to move on to the next. And for this one, it's going to be a very long-haired, much different than this one, because we're going to keep it very straight and kind of vertical strands. So this is a little different because this hair has a little bit more weight to it. So you gotta just keep in mind when you're drawing hair that has a little length to it, that gravity is pulling it down a little bit. So while I'm drawing these strands, I'm kind of keeping that in the back of my mind and how it would actually fall upon like her shoulders and how it would curve around the arch of her back. And then when drawing it like on the actual shoulder, just keep in mind that like the hair properties and how it would actually fall along the shoulder line. Okay, and then for our last one, we're going to have a more styled hair. So instead of having it be perfectly straight or kind of just naturally lay how it would, we're going to pull it back into a ponytail to kind of show how hair looks when it's riding against each other in a completely different direction. So for the front of her head, I'm just going to do some strands coming off. Then I'm going to pull it in the other direction. And for this one, I'm going to keep it a little closer to the scalp because I'm imagining if the hair was being pulled all the way to the back. So you can see where here it's a little bit more higher and loose, but in the fourth head, it's definitely tighter and closer to the skin. And then this is where I'm going to break it up and have this larger strand kind of come from the front to the side. And that'll demonstrate how we'll have hair going almost vertical against hair that's going vertical. Okay, so then now that we have the three hairs that I'm going to be going through kind of sketched out, I'm going to go ahead and start picking out some colors for them. So for the first one, I'm going to keep it a very neutral color based. So on a new layer, I'm going to go ahead and lay it down. So this will be kind of our neutral brown standard hair color. And then for the long straight haired one, we're going to go with the platinum blonde. And this one is kind of tough to do because it is so close to white that creating the shadows in it sometimes looks wrong or it looks too yellow. And that's one big mistake is I see people use like this kind of a yellow for platinum blondes. So even though a platinum blonde is much more of a lighter color than like a dirty blonde, it's definitely not like sunflower golden marigold yellow. So we're going to stay away from that. And then for our last one, we're going to go through how to create hair using kind of abstract colors. So for this chick, we're going to use blue. Okay. So for each of these heads, I'm going to create their own little folder that we're just going to go through and create each of these things. Oops, I did these on the same layer. So I'm going to go ahead and put that down there. And I'm going to name my layer so that I don't get lost. And it's easier to navigate through. Okay. So now that I'm all kind of organized and ready to go, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lay down the base colors for each. So on a new layer, I'm going to put it under the outline layer. Then I'm going to go ahead and fill it in with this dark brown color. And now while I'm filling this in, when I'm going near the edges, I'm trying to make sure I'm not creating too sharp of an edge, especially where it kind of points out. Because if I had made a really thick and hard line, it's going to stand out when I'm doing the detailing process, and then it'll just look wrong. So instead, I'm going to get close to the edge, but kind of have a softer edge, and then do those kind of refined details near the end. And the reason that I'm working with a dark color first is because it's easier to draw a light on top than it would be if you started with a lighter color and then try to build in the shadows and make it look natural. It can work, and I've seen a lot of great artists do it, but I found it much easier to work from a darker color palette and then work your way up. And another thing that I see artists do is they use the smudge tool for creating their hair. I would definitely give that a try as well. That's something I tried when I first started learning Photoshop and how to use my tablet. And it was kind of a nice pick-me-up. But now that I'm using kind of this solid color building technique for almost all my pieces, I find it much faster to just go in and lay on the color manually. So when I'm doing these strokes, I'm kind of keeping it heavier near the base, and then as I'm going out to where it kind of ends, I'm keeping it really light, and I'm kind of lifting up the pen off of the tablet a little bit, trying to avoid creating that hard edge. draw a little bit over the ear. So in areas that you can see cleanup that needs to be done, so like in this area right here, you can see how this looks kind of unnatural, so you can go in and clean it up a little bit. Just a few quick strokes and it looks much better. And I'm just going to kind of round off the top of the head. And then where the hair actually begins to kind of come out, there's going to be a few little strands sticking out. Okay. So from here, I'm going to move on to the long and straight haired. And just like before, I'm going to go to my next group, create a new layer in there. And I'm going to go ahead and start with the darkest color that I have chosen. So when I lay down this, you can definitely see the line art a lot more clearly than when I was laying down the dark brown. And while that is nice, it'll be a little bit more difficult later when I'm trying to detail and then I take the line art layer off, because then I can see that maybe some of my lines were a little more messy than I wanted them to be. So then in areas where it's behind the actual head, what I'll do is I'll just create a new layer underneath the head and then lay it on right under. So I'm not worrying about covering the face or any of the skin. So right now, I'm not worrying about individual strands. I'm just trying to color it in as a whole. And then I'll worry about drawing the individual strands later on. Okay, then finally we're going to move on to the blue-haired chick. So I'm going to go underneath that line art there, grab my dark blue, and fill it in. Since I drew a lot of little strands coming off, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to focus on filling them in too much, but kind of just lightly touch upon them. And then I'll worry about detailing that later on. So I'm just going to go ahead and keep filling this in near the back. And then on the side. And then in the actual ponytail. And for this, I can kind of just fade off near the end where the tips are, because that'll be less dense than where it is near the top. And just like before, I'm going to create a layer underneath the head to get these strands that are coming from the right side of her face. Okay, so now we have our base colors down and we're ready to move on to the next part. And in this part, we're going to lay a multiply layer underneath the hair but on top of the skin. And the reason I'm doing this is because if I actually go ahead and create a new layer, put it under the hair, change it to a multiply, and while using my soft edge brush, what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab some of that skin color, and then where the hair kind of lays right on top of the skin, I'm going to go ahead and just lightly lay down some of this multiplied brush, because in the end it'll look more like the hair is laying on top of the skin rather than just sitting right on top with no shadows or anything, because the hair definitely creates a little bit of a shadow. And then in areas where it comes off of the face a little bit, so like these strands are kind of up here, you can draw the shadow that would be coming down around that curve of that eyebrow. So now when I turn the layer on and off, you can see how it creates kind of a difference from it looking like this to looking like this. And I'm going to go ahead and do that to each of them. And I'm going to be doing so using the same process. For her, I don't have to worry too much because her hair doesn't fall in different strands as much as the first one did. But I will have to do some of that for her. So grab that skin color. And then lay it down. So now we're going to go ahead and lay our second color down. So I'm going to go back to the first head. And on top of the line art layer, I'm going to just go ahead and grab my normal brush that I usually use. And I'm going to grab that second color. And the second color is the same as the first, but a little warmer. So where I'm having the sun hit the actual hair part, I'm choosing kind of a more warm color to represent that. And when I'm laying this down, I'm trying to follow that natural curve of the hair instead of trying to fight it. So it's kind of creating a flow, and you just have to work with it, and in the end it'll look a lot more natural when you're done. And I'm keeping in mind that I'm trying to stay near the center of the curve so that it's kind of reflecting how the light would be hitting it. And as you can see, this part gets a little messy. So then what I like to do is I like to grab my first color again, and using a harder edge brush, I go in and clean it up a little bit. kind of recreating those lines that I did in the line art when we laid those down. And what I'm doing is I'm just looking for kind of a path for my brush to follow, and I darken the edges of those paths. So you can see how it's like certain shapes are forming right now, and how it's pushing certain areas above other areas to give it more of a depth. And using that first brush again, I'm going to go ahead and just lay on that darker color where it would be a little bit more shadow heavy. Because I'm following the light that I created from the face, so I'm having it coming from kind of the front overhead. So there we go. So I'm going to move on to my next one. And just like before, I'm going to lay it right on top. Oh, it seems I have my line art on the layer up here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to quickly copy that over. Alright, there we go. So now back to laying down the second color. So with longer hair, instead of having one shine, like for this one, we're going to have one shine that kind of sprawls across the top. But for her, I'm going to have a double shine. So it's going to catch light here and in this area. And I'm doing that because if you can imagine that the hair is like an S, well, wherever the points are at the most kind of extreme, that's where it'll be catching the light the most. So I'm kind of representing that here in the actual hair. I'm not worrying too much about detail or anything, and I'm just going to go ahead and move on to the next. So the blue one really shows up nice on how laying a lighter color over a darker color kind of gives it that instant depth that you're looking for in a realistic hair. So I'm going to go along with the direction of the hair when I'm laying down these brush strokes. And you can see how it creates kind of a natural feel of the hair being pulled back to the back. So something like that. And now I'm going to go and take my third color and I'm going to lay it on top of that second color. So now when I'm doing this, I'm looking for where the second color was applied kind of the most, And then I'm going to be applying the third color on top of that pretty heavily. So for this, you want to avoid going like near the ends and trying to use this color for that, or doing more of a like all over paint. You're trying to kind of focus it down into certain areas to create the depth that you want and to kind of give the perception that there's light hitting the hair. So after I lay down kind of a basic splash of color, I'm going to go ahead and, with my harder edge brush, I'm going to zoom in just a little bit. I'm going to make it quite small, and I'm doing that so that I can lay down individual strokes that'll be laid right on top. And while I'm doing this, I'm following the basic kind of flow that at the hair under it's going in, but I'm also kind of breaking it up by having some strands that don't follow that natural flow. That'll make it feel a little bit more real. So I'm working pretty quick, and I'm trying to keep my hand constantly moving, and this will help keep kind of a perfect line order going. It's kind of breaking it up and forming lines that are a little more inconsistent with each other. But even now, I'm not worrying about detailing too much yet, because that's going to be the very final step of where I'm even going outside of the base color of the hair that I laid down. This is still just to give it a little bit more shape. And there we go. And I'm going to do the same for the other two. And now for the platinum blonde, I'm choosing a color that's pretty close to white, but still not white. And I'm just kind of trying to recreate a sheen that would be spread across the entire length of the hair. So once again, I'm just, even though most of these hairline strands that I'm creating now are in the same direction, I'm still adding a few that are a little different and crisscrossing just a little bit to add a little bit more of a realism sense to it. And then where that second glow kind of comes in near the bottom, where it's catching the light, and then it's at this point that I'm going to take off that outline, and I'm going to go ahead and kind of see where it's looking a little bare with just the first color. And then onto my blue-haired girl. And grab that really light blue. And then near the center of that curve, go ahead and draw my reflecting light in. I'm also going to take off that line art. So now when I'm drawing these, I'm still following that curve of the head, just since it's being pulled back so tight and it's kind of unnatural. I'm having a lot of different crisscrossing patterns and strokes while I'm drawing these. And underneath it's going to be a little darker, so I'm not going to be adding too many of these light shines. Okay, so now we're going to start doing with the detail, because from this point we have kind of our base colors laid down, just we need to clean it up and make it look a little bit more realistic. So starting with the first head that we have, I'm going to start with a multiply layer. And what I'm going to be doing with this is I'm going to be grabbing just the hair color and kind of shaping it a little bit more to the lighting that I have in place. And I can also zoom in a little bit so that I can follow kind of the edges of the separate strands of hair that I have created. And you see how those begin to pop a little bit more. So like if I want that underneath this strand, I'll just make it a little darker and pull it up. Something like that. And now when I turn the layer on and off, you can just see the subtle difference it makes. And I'm going to move on to the blonde. Do the same thing. Up here I'm kind of focusing more on where the sheen isn't, so where that light's hitting it the most intense. And I'm just kind of playing around the edges of where the hair kind of breaks up into separate groups. So the main reason I'm doing this is to kind of help the eye follow a pattern that we've laid in place. And the blue hair check. So I'm going to grab one of the blues that are in her hair, and then I'm going to lay it much heavier in this back area. And where it catches that edge right there. Okay, so now we can finally add our sheen to it to kind of bring it out even more with an overlay layer. And this will also help make it feel a little bit more warm, as if there's a light hitting it. So to do that, I'm just going to grab our middle color, and with the soft edge brush, I'm going to go ahead and lay it right on top. And I'm going to do that for all three. But for hers, I'm going to choose that really light color, and I'm going to kind of highlight that sheen that we created. So you can see how it stands out quite a bit more now. And have it at some of that trail down. And also for her. You can see how this one kind of makes it more of an electric looking blue. So now that we have kind of everything in place, the last thing that we have to do is add the finer details. So with my hard edge brush, I'm going to go ahead and kind of messy it up a little bit. So I have some hairlines that come off of the base. I'm going to do that in the back, pretty much all around the head. And then for the inside of the head, I'm going to grab more of a lighter color to kind of fill in some of these details. And as we get more toward the darker part, I'm kind of letting off a little bit of the pressure while I'm putting down some of these detail strokes. And there we go. So I'm going to move on to the blonde and do the same thing. So while adding these kind of strands that come off, add some realistic detail. If you add too much, it gets to be a little heavy looking and it almost takes away from the piece rather than bringing to it. So instead, just kind of sparingly use them, or if you do use a lot, like I tend to use a lot, kind of hide them a little bit, and so that they don't stand out quite as much. So almost light up or let up a little bit while you're laying them down, so you're getting kind of a lower opacity hair strand. Once again, I'm going to break up some of that regular looking strands in here. And then lastly, the blue-haired one. Now since her hair seems a little more wild, I can kind of play off of that and create a lot of little strokes and make it a little heavier. And even in areas where like the hair's coming up, there would still be some kind of strands showing, and you can see some of the skin through it. So just adding that little detail definitely helps. And having a lot of it kind of hang off definitely creates more of a sense of realism as well. And where it actually comes out of the ponytail, have it be a little messy. And then you can see where I had the base of that color kind of opacity out. So I'm going to go ahead and cover that with these strands. So that way this looks a lot more fluid now. I'm going to go ahead and grab that lighter blue to kind of break up that how regular the strands and strokes look in the center. So then from here, I'm going to go ahead and turn our background layer back to a solid white to kind of show the results. So you can kind of see how the platinum blonde, how it looks a lot more natural against the white background than the gray. But it was easier to work on this kind of a background than if I was trying to work on that because of how close these colors are. And then from here, this is where I would go in and I would final touch a lot of stuff. So like for this hair, I would go in and I would probably detail a lot of these strands a little bit more, just to kind of give it more of a full, thick head of hair kind of a feel. So now, once I'm at a point where I'm feeling pretty good about how each of these are looking, I would call it done and kind of move on to the next part. So really quick, I'm just going to add some eyebrows because it's making these look a little strange right now. So I can even go ahead and grab the blue from the hair. Lay that on thick at first and then go on with smaller brush kind of detail. Okay, so there we go. And I'm also going to include the just a blank Photoshop file of the heads, which you can bring into any software because I'll save it as a JPEG as well. And from there you can use that to kind of practice your own hair techniques, and if you'd like, post them back. I'd love to see the feedback, and I hope you learned something from watching this. So thanks for watching.